when he was a little boy, born in 35, so you figure out when he was a little boy, and he fished in the river a lot, and the river was different then than it was in 1998. It had been moved. It had been armored against the valley walls so that there could be railroads and roads and farming, and people didn't quite understand when they did that what the damage could have been and was to some degree. But he began to think about, we used to have all these beautiful fishing holes and meanders, and he wanted those back. And since we had, I don't know, almost a mile of river or so on our place, if not a little more, he thought, I want to put meanders back in the river because I want better fishing, and I know that this will work.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. I think one of the most embattled words we have in natural resources today is conservation. How would you define it?
I'm not sure I've thought about that much, but it's not necessarily a happy word for me.
Mm-hmm.
I see it as a word that should mean taking care of something, but I often see it used as a way to overprotect or keep from utilizing a resource or an entity or an area the way it should be used. So if I were to define it for me, I would say that it would be a way of looking, let's say, at my land, for example, and keeping it sustainable and healthy. In that way, I would conserve it, so to speak. But the word is not one that I like to use often with respect to how I work our land and take care of it.
Yeah, I think it's been hijacked. And a lot of left-leaning groups will say that what they're doing is conservation, but when it comes to the practice of it, it's more like preservation. So I tend to call those groups preservation groups when they might themselves call themselves conservation groups. If we go to the dictionary, it says conservation is the prevention of the wrongful use of a natural resource, which sounds about right to me. Like, we wouldn't call them resources if they didn't have a use. That's the nature of a resource. But we don't want to use these things wrongly. Otherwise, we won't be able to continue using them. And it has, negative impacts for other things. But use of natural resources can be very stimulating for them and, is oftentimes necessary for the health of that resource.
I absolutely agree. And I agree with your concept of preservation versus conservation. And I think that describes better what I was trying to say when you asked me the question, because it's not about preserving, but it's using it in an appropriate way, in a way that it was meant to be used, in a way that also helps improve and move it forward.
Mm-hmm. You've had an interesting career that's moved you around throughout the country, and some things, would surprise a lot of people about you. What's something that you feel like tends to consistently surprise people when they learn it about you?
Boy, I'm not really sure what surprises people about me. I've been fortunate in my life and the way I've moved around. I'm not sure that a lot of people know that maybe not that it's terribly surprising, but I grew up in a small town in Texas and not a lot of money and a great mom and dad, but just had to watch our pennies and that. And maybe that I taught school. That might surprise folks.
What did you teach?
I had a degree, double major in my undergraduate in earth science and physical education. And I always visualized when I finished college that I would go and teach PE because I loved it. But my first teaching job, or my only teaching job, at least in the true essence of teacher, was to teach earth science to seventh and eighth graders. So that was what I taught.
It's interesting. Earth science is something that's very interesting to me because the ages that we are taught earth science are not ages that we tend to be interested in it. That comes with maturity. I remember distinctively my first day of college, maybe even before the first day, there was like an orientation job fair type deal with the different department heads, and it wasn't a silly time to do that because we'd already declared our majors. We had our course curriculums and everything, but I guess that's the point where they start letting you have doubts about your decisions. But anyways, there was a guy named Rob Thomas who was a terrific professor, and he won awards for his work as a professor. Anyways, Rob Thomas was a geologist, and he asked me what I was studying, and I said wildlife biology. And he said, "You kids, you think animals are sexy now, but when you grow up, you're going to think rocks are cool." I was like, man, rocks are not now cool, nor have they ever been cool, and I could not have been more wrong. By the time I was graduating college, I was so fascinated by geology, and I started looking around at the earth and thinking of it as a track. Like, this is the evidence of something that has happened. Like, this is how the earth has responded from pressures from below and above, and I want to know what those pressures were. I want to know what this story is, and it's right here. I just don't know how to read this language.
Right.
And I still look at that. I'm increasingly interested in how it all happened. But, in seventh grade, I just wasn't there yet. And I'm sure your kids struggled with that too.
They did to a degree. They had fun. I had fun. But I was sort of like you, except that I didn't know there was a major called earth science. And when I was a little girl, my favorite thing was every year my dad could take off work for 2 weeks, and he loved the West, and he knew it like the back of his hand. So we would all do what you did in those times, hop in the back of your car and drive around to the national parks. And he would explain, though, he called it upheavals and other terms that are not really often used in geology, but he got me very interested as a little girl in rocks, and I loved the crystals because they were so sparkly. And I still love crystals today. But when I got to college, I was certain that I was going to major, I knew for sure, physical education, but I really thought biology has to be my second major. And after one semester, nope, but I stumbled onto something called earth science, and I thought I had died and gone to heaven because I loved physical education, but I loved rocks, and I loved astronomy, and I loved geology, and all of the things that came in the major of earth science. So yeah, as an adult, I found this thing called earth science and fell in love with it because I've always been fascinated with how things got to where they are. And even now, particularly out west, when I drive, I'm always looking and thinking, how did that happen? And then, our local geologist, Ellen Bishop, is amazing, and I would love to take a field trip with her and just add to my knowledge on that.
Yeah, I've asked Ellen to be on the show a few times. There's been scheduling issues in the past before, but she's a slippery fish to nail down for an interview. And I think it's funny because she's also a journalist. So I'm sure that she understands how painful it is when you're trying to get an interview from somebody. Ellen, are you listening right now? Yeah.
She would be a great one.
Call me back.
Ellen, you have to do this.
Yeah, because I'm really interested in getting to the bottom of Hell's Canyon. Lots and lots of geologists have different theories, have different timelines. There's a lot of conflicting information out there, and some of the most well-accepted stories about the formation of Hell's Canyon don't make any sense to me. I've spent a lot of time down there. I spend a lot of time going there to specifically think about how it could have occurred. And your eyes go through that landscape very differently if that's what is on your mind.
Yeah.
So I'm talking to as many geologists as I can to try to get to the bottom of hells.
Well, good for you.
So after you discovered that teaching wasn't everything that you hoped it would be, what was the next move?
Well, actually, teaching was. However, my husband then and I got, we were young whippersnappers, so we got caught up in this idea of this pyramid marketing thing, and it seemed like, gosh, it's something we could sell, something we could make money. And of course, it never worked, so we went broke, and I had quit teaching to do that. And so it was in November, and we needed money because we were broke. He could get the better job because you don't school teach in November. So he took the car, and I needed money too for the family. So I thought, well, I've got to walk to work wherever I go. And there were lots of restaurants about 4 blocks from my house. And McDonald's was one of them. I had only eaten there a couple of times. My aunt had taken me, and I thought, well, if I'm going to work in a restaurant, I may as well work where I like the food, but I loved their Big Mac after 2 times. So I walked down the street, and I got this job at McDonald's on the front counter, and it was fascinating. I loved it. But 6 months later, I thought, well, I've got to go back to teaching school because I really love that. And I told him, well, I'm going to be leaving you in August because I'm going to apply to teach school again. And I don't know, a week or so later, this guy comes by and he says, well, I'd like to talk with you. I knew that he had something to do with the restaurant, but I didn't know what. Well, he was an area supervisor, as they call it. He had 4 restaurants that he oversaw. And he said, would you like to come to work for us in management? And I was kind of dumbfounded because I never saw myself working for a corporation. My dad worked for the railroad, and he was in the union, and you just didn't work, for the corporation. And I had to think about it, and I didn't even know that there was a franchise restaurant and a company-owned restaurant. I didn't know what McDonald's was,
Right.
Because it was no big deal. I didn't grow. My little town in Ennis, south of Dallas, didn't have any McDonald's. I had no idea what it was in Dallas because I just didn't see commercials. No idea. But I was working in a company-owned restaurant. And so I thought, well, this has been a lot of fun, but I never thought about being a manager. But when I looked around and saw what managers did, I thought, well, this is a lot like being on a field and playing a sport, and I knew how to do that. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to make $6,700 a year teaching school. What are you going to pay me? Well, we're going to pay you $9,300. Well, money spoke.
Yeah, that's more than 67.
It's a little bit more. So I went to work as a manager trainee, and I have to say that the 26 years I spent in McDonald's, I never stopped teaching, and I fell in love with everything that McDonald's had to offer, honestly. So I loved teaching. I got to continue doing it throughout my corporate career, so that's how the teaching thing went.
So what did you teach for McDonald's, or is that a good way to summarize your leadership style?
I'd say my leadership style, because when you're an assistant in a restaurant, you're teaching crew how to do the job. You're teaching them how to work with each other. There's a lot of teaching that goes on. And then as you move up in the corporation, to me, leadership is about teaching and coaching. I think that's a key part of leadership, or at least for my style it was. I spent a lot of time as I began to get into management learning about management and how to work with people. You've probably heard of Ken Blanchard, I'm not sure, but Leadership on the 1 Minute Manager kind of formed my early days of learning, and that was all about teaching. So I think that was one of the attractive things from McDonald's in the time that I spent there. But another was the freedom in the operations end of the company. McDonald's, I'm very biased, as you can probably tell already, about the quality of the company, the quality of the people, the quality of the food, and the way I was treated. I didn't know that when I accepted that job as a manager trainee, that was 1972. And that was the first year that the corporation had ever hired women to work in any of their restaurants, company-owned. So I was the first woman in Dallas to be hired to work for the company. Found that out. It didn't I didn't think much about it, because yeah, I was working with all men, but I was a tomboy. I grew up playing with boys. I loved sports, so it was not an unnatural thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't bother me. But back to the idea of McDonald's, they didn't just bring women on. They brought women on, and through time they developed. Today we would call it probably inclusivity or diversity training or those words, but it was just helping folks understand that there were no differences. We just needed to treat people like people, and it was really great that I was supported. There were a couple of times that I wasn't by one person that I worked for, but there was someone else there to step in and make sure that I didn't get treated unfairly. But that was a really important part of the company as I looked back, over my career and the support that I received, because it was always men.
What was your job when you left?
I was the regional vice president in Boston. So we had 300 restaurants then. It was franchisee, most of them, and about 30 company-owned restaurants. So I had half of Massachusetts as my region and all of Maine and New Hampshire.
Okay, nice. You are the reason that if I'm going to eat fast food, I'm going to eat McDonald's. And I think if for the people that know you, they find this a contrast because you care so much about small scale sustainable agriculture, and that seems to be at odds with this giant, which is McDonald's. But that's not necessarily the case, right? Is McDonald's still the largest buyer of beef in the country?
I don't know that for sure. But as big as McDonald's may seem to the outside world, that is one of the qualities about the company that I absolutely respect and admire. And it started with Ray Kroc. Most of the restaurants in McDonald's are franchised, so they're owned by small people, small companies. And I was so, I guess McDonald's taught me so much respect for a small business person. That was who I spent the majority of my career with, were men and women who worked their butts off somewhere in another field to earn money, and wanted to have a McDonald's restaurant, and then watch them work for 2 or 3 or 4 years to get through all the qualifications necessary, and then become owner-operators. And then my job just varied in degree as I moved through the corporation about how much help I could give them or what I was supposed to do to support them, because the restaurant in McDonald's is the heart and soul of the company, and taking care of the customer is the most important thing that you can do. So my career, my mindset has always been for that level of business. Even though the corporation as a whole is huge, it never had that culture internally. Ray Kroc insisted on customer satisfaction, people satisfaction, and taking care of franchisees. And I just really respected what the company stands for in that essence. So it's big, but it's really not. It's a bunch of small companies or individuals in terms of numbers and sizes that make it successful.
Yeah. And if you go to a little sale yard like over here in La Grande, and somebody has one animal, one beef that they want to sell, there's a chance that a buyer there is going to buy that animal and it's going to end up going to McDonald's.
Big chance.
Very big chance. And I've seen McDonald's buyers at that sale, so I'm not just bringing this up as a hypothetical. And I do think that that's interesting because that is this mega corporation that is buying from a small scale producer of cattle. That guy might have 17 head of cattle in his pasture, and this is the one that was going to go to the sale this year, and he's directly benefiting from that. And I think that's pretty cool. From a business standpoint, I mean, McDonald's is such an incredible success and was very innovative. And some of the movies and stuff that have come out about that can give that an ugly look. And maybe some of that's deserved, maybe it's not. I have no idea. But you can't argue with the success of the business. And I think it's really interesting what you did there. I remember one of the first times I met you. I was 12 years old, I think. I was buck hunting, and we were staying with you and Doug. And I made some kind of snide comment about McDonald's not being healthy food, and I got put on blast. I got taught, and I respected you then for that, and I respect you now for that, because you didn't treat me like a kid that said something stupid. You treated me like a person who was saying something that they didn't know what they were talking about, and you were going to provide me with the information that I was lacking because you were an expert in that field and I wasn't. And I think that we should all really celebrate the people who are willing to do that for us.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons I started this show was because of Doug, because I treasured him as a man, and he had great stories, and I think it's a shame that I don't have those stories recorded.
Yeah.
I wish I would have started sooner. But tell me a little bit about Doug McDaniels.
Oh. Wow. Well, he's not someone who's easy to tell someone else a little bit about. He was, other than my son, the most important gift of my life. What a treasure to meet him. He was so fascinating, so unique, so creative, so determined in his willingness to get something done, to fight for the land, to take care of the land, to take care of the people who needed it. That was something that was so important to him. He had a great love of family. He was a great leader in our family, and I just so admired him. One of the fascinating things, beside his creativity and willingness to execute that, was his desire and hunger to always be learning and growing. He did not stop learning about himself or the world up until the moment that he moved on to another place. And he just taught me a lot about that. I was such a novice when I came out here about the land. I knew that it was important, but I didn't really know how important. I didn't know what a small community like this could be in its scope of vitality, and I didn't really understand the connection strongly between working the land and what that provides in the depth and up to us and the rest of the world. It's the basis, it's our foundation. And he taught me so much about the land and why it was important. And he wanted other people to know the same. So he was always talking about it, whether it was the land, the trees, the river, as you well know. Doug was a person that he took life by the horns and he lived it. Life did not live him. He lived life. And he always challenged me. I mean, almost every day there was a challenge in terms of what I could learn, what I could think about, how I could respond, how I could react. He just was an amazing teacher for me and made me a much better person for knowing him and experiencing him. And I appreciated, too, he taught me more about men and women, our husbands and wives, and I hadn't really ever thought about in that depth. I think sometimes I drove him crazy because I'm fairly independent, as you know, and I had to learn that he was independent and he was strong, and there were things that were important to him as a man that he wanted to do for the woman he was married to. And that for a while contradicted my 70s women's whatever that went on back when I was growing up. But I learned that it's important in a partnership to give and take in the ways that men and women are men and women. And he taught me that without, I think, really understanding that he was teaching me that. And, I guess finishing, the thing about him, too, that how would I say? he just loved me. He loved me for who I was. He loved me completely. He loved me unconditionally, and I had never known that in that way from a husband until I met Doug. And it still feels good today to know that I had the honor and the pleasure of having that kind of person in my life who would just love me and take care of me, no questions asked.
I think he also loved what you either allowed or made him become. Because the pre-Gail Doug was a different animal. You know, he's the only person that I've ever been fired by. I was 8 years old.
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness.
I got fired in the morning and I got hired again in the afternoon.
I've heard he did that a lot.
Yep. Just, kept working and hoped that it was going to be okay.
Well,
he was a very tough guy,
mm-hmm.
but he was also very sensitive.
Yeah.
And even, at what stage did he stop doing 100 push-ups a day?
I think when he finally got maybe 3 years out from passing away.
Yeah. Yeah. So he'd had cancer for a while at that point.
He knew 5 years is how long we knew that he had it. Yeah.
So I remember at brandings and stuff, you'd see these kids that were tough and they're out there mugging calves and they might say something tough around Doug, which was always a mistake. And then he'd challenge them to do one-arm push-ups or whatever.
Mm.
But also very sensitive. He was really reckless with a lot of his life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Reckless in adventure,
mm-hmm.
but survived miraculously a number of things, right? How many jet boats and helicopters? Like more than one of each?
Well,
Did he
I
crash?
know that he crashed, one jet boat. The helicopter I wasn't around then, thank God. I don't know if my heart could have taken it, but his helicopter crashed on him twice, and he had some fascinating stories about that. But you're right. He must have worn out a couple of hundred guardian angels, I swear, because he would keep people around him safe, but with regard to himself and his willingness to he would see and do. And it never occurred to him that there might be a step or two in between that he should have taken for himself to be safe. Now, if you want to go on a drift boat down the Grand Round, I'll go with him any day because it was always safe because he was always safe with people in his boat. Like when he crashed his jet boat, he had everybody get out of the jet boat before he tried Granite at Rapid. And, of course, he didn't make it. But, the boat didn't make it. He made it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he was a wild man. He was the person who taught me how to row the Grand Ronde, taught me a lot about whitewater, taught me a lot about fly fishing. And, just terrific memories. It was really neat to learn more about him and know him for so much of my life. That was something that was really special to me. And now, because we're talking about conservation, Doug, as you said, was passionate about conservation, but he was also very much a user of resources.
Mm-hmm.
In his time, he'd spent a lot of time logging,
right?
A lot of time crushing rock.
Yes.
Commercial fishing in a super sketchy boat, which I think might have also sank.
No, I think it made it, but I think it had some troubles. We even looked for it when we went to the coast one time. We went to Newport, and he said, I know it's got to be here somewhere. And so we went looking for the boat to see if he could see it. He wasn't sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it was out past the bar catching fish.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, hopefully so. So, again, a lot of people would look at a guy like Doug who, you can imagine, trailing a big string of mules into the backcountry, leaning on some great big stump with a chainsaw that was bigger than he was, or, dragging a trawler out across the ocean to get whatever, crushing away the rock on a hillside. And you'd think this guy is just a user. He is just taking. And that wasn't at all the case. And when it came to river restoration, that's where you guys took a really, really big step. a really big and important step. So tell me about your river restoration project on the Wallowa River.
Okay. And before I do the river, and I know you understand this, but yes, Doug did log when he was a young man, and he logged hard. But as he grew to understand impacts, he changed his perspective about logging and
Sure.
became, as you know, a great proponent of sustainable logging, of appropriate logging, and that's what he did on the rest of his land. But when it comes to the river, when I met Doug, I also met this river, in front of our house, and he talked about it a great deal. And, that was in 98, and already he was, years prior, he had been trying to get a vision that he had. His whole concept was when he was a little boy, born in 35, so you figure out when he was a little boy, and he fished in the river a lot, and the river was different then than it was in 1998. It had been moved, it had been armored against the valley walls so that there could be railroads and roads and farming, and people didn't quite understand when they did that what the damage could have been and was to some degree. But he began to think about, we used to have all these beautiful fishing holes and meanders, and he wanted those back. And since we had, I don't know, almost a mile of river or so on our place, if not a little more, he thought, I want to put meanders back in the river because I want better fishing, and I know that this will work. And he tried to get, all the agencies that would be approving it to approve it, and no one would. And by the time I met him in 98, and then along about, I don't know, 90 or somewhere in there, Nils Christofferson, who now runs Wallowa Resources, came along, and he was hired by Wallowa Resources. And Doug convinced Nils that Wallowa Resources needed a project, that we needed to do this river restoration. And Nils bought into the idea of river restoration. And he had the ability to bring the agencies together, whether it was the state and the feds, the tribal, all of the groups that might have had a say-so on whether or not you could relow a river. He brought them together because he believed in the vision that Doug laid out. And Doug could just see, he could just talk about and visualize how this was going to work and what it was going to be like. So finally, after about 3 years of bringing people together, for a total of 17 years in the long term of trying to get this done, you would think that a landowner who wants to offer up his property to the state to reconfigure and improve the habitat for animals and the fish and the biome and everything involved, that it would not be a hard thing to do. But it was extraordinarily difficult because of, I think, my words, of silos that people were in, and because no one had ever moved a river this big before, at least in Oregon, if not in, west of the Mississippi, we've been told that. But so people had reluctance, and Nils convinced them to come together. So then the engineering started, the layout, the plans, and finally in 2005, the big machines came, and the Wallowa River was a quarter mile of it was turned into a half mile in our first project, with beautiful meanders and structures in the river to try to make it, stronger and better and provide fishing holes and such. And so that was our first project. Shortly after that, the governor, I don't know how he got wind of it, but heard about it. And whatever happens with people saying someone deserves recognition, well, Doug and also Wallowa Resources were given an award by the governor. And from that point, that was in probably 2005 too, then we had Ground Run Model Watershed approach us, as well as the state again, and they wanted to do a second project. And it only took, instead of 17 years, 2 years to get all the approval and to get this next project underway. And that's the magic of having something successfully be built, and then people that maybe have power realizing how good it can be, moving barriers and obstacles out of the way. You still had to do it right, but it wasn't this reluctance on everyone's part to do it. I think the first year after we opened the first project, we had a extraordinarily high water event, and the river was beautiful in its floodplain and the way it carried the water, and it was just magnificent the way it did it. So by 2007, we had another project that was upriver, another quarter mile turned into a half mile. And so from 2007 until 2020, the whole new two projects just grew and blossomed, created habitat for fish, for animals. The whole biome was just magnificent too. And we've had lots of visitors come and look at it. And what it did was, as you well know, it helped pave the way for what happened on your ranch, the Six Ranch. It helped you guys get rid of some of the barriers that you had. So you moved forward and did the next level of projects. And then the river just started, the projects started happening. We had another one in the county. Now we've had also, I think, 4 in the county. Out of the county, there are river relocation projects to put meanders and habitat back in. So it just stimulated a whole arena of willingness and understanding that we can improve the rivers, that we didn't know that we were kind of messing up quite a bit when we moved them and made them fast and hard, as opposed to having meanders where the water could move slow and at least give habitat. And finally, as the years went on from these first 2 projects, Doug, he was on the river often. I mean, he just loved the river. So he would drag me down. Gail, it's flooding. Come look at all the topsoil I'm getting. Look at all of this. Look. And I would just look, and it would be fascinating. But he began to figure out we needed to do more, and so did the state. Give those folks credit for learning about what they had helped create. And so before Doug passed away, we were able to secure a third project in which side channels were then put across some of the larger meanders that we had built in both river projects, as well as doing some work on the original projects to make the meanders that we had put in stay meanders and not straighten out as much as they were trying to, and also make the holes deeper so the fish would have better cover from predation, etc. So in 2000, the year after Doug passed away, we did the third project and put in meanders and new floodplains in both projects, and it's been fascinating. We had a high water event just right after, I guess last year we had an ultra high water event, and watching that river perform was just really cool to see how the floodplain was working, how it would slow down water for the little fish coming through the floods. And so that's kind of the essence of it. He was such a visionary about what could be, and then his determination, finally made it happen. And I had the pleasure of carrying out the last one. I had a lot to learn. I still don't know nearly what Doug knew, but it's been fascinating to watch it, develop and see what happens.
It took us 18 years to get a permit to do our river restoration. And, I've said that enough times that people have heard it. So government careers tend to last for 20 years. So you could almost take somebody's entire career and have them dedicate it to not allowing a landowner to improve fish habitat on the river. And that's what was going on. But that responsibility of stopping these projects was being shared by a lot of different agencies, because when we disturb the soil here, it affects the Pacific Ocean. So there are a lot of consequences to what we do. In that same light, there's a lot of very positive consequences, because we drastically improved the quality of the health of the rivers, starting with the insects and then moving up from there. Now we're sending out a lot more salmon and steelhead to the ocean. We've got a lot more spawning habitat. We've got better habitat for residual fish. We've cooled the water down. That 18-year figure, though, that may still be ongoing today if it weren't for the work that you and Doug did to be able to make it happen. So you didn't just get your foot in the door. You took a shotgun to the hinges. And because of that, and because of the success of your project, because of the success of the projects on the Six Ranch, then other landowners who had sections of the river and were interested in improvement, but were afraid of allowing the government to come onto their land, which you have to do if you're going to do projects like this, their fears weren't realized. Like nothing bad happened.
No.
They didn't discover some new endangered species that was going to shut us down. Nothing bad happened. It was all positive. And, because of setting that example, then lots of other landowners have been able to do it. And I don't know, is there 5 or 6 miles of river that's been fixed in the
I would
valley
say
now?
at least, if I were guessing,
Yeah.
and it's been a good partnership, and it's been, I appreciate when folks want to come and learn about it. I've had, as you know, the colleges want to come, but then I've had individuals that, I even had my cardiologist come because he wanted to know about it. And then he brought friends. But every time we get to help someone that doesn't really understand this kind of work, whether it's a government person that may have been nervous about it, or it's a person from the city who doesn't maybe have any experience with what takes place on a river. It's been exciting and interesting to be able to allow that to happen, to talk about the RED's development and to talk about the things you've said, with all the improvements, that we see, and to have even we graze ours as you do. And I think it's important for folks to understand that this idea of conservation is not limiting, but using these resources appropriately. This year, as I was walking through my project, for the last 2 years, I haven't been able to graze the river riparian area because of the new construction, just to kind of make sure the plants are getting established. But prior to that, we had been grazing it. We'd had it with our first 2 projects. We couldn't graze for 10 years because we had an agreement that we wouldn't. But then we grazed it for the next 3 years before this next project happened. What I've noticed is this reed canary grass that grows in the bottoms, it's really destructive to other grasses and also to small side channels like we were putting in, because it takes over and just grows and chokes them out. But when I grazed it hard, and at a time of the year that was the right time of the year, which is the spring, where the cattle aren't going to graze on the shrubs, and they're not going to do any damage to the reed canary by grazing it down really hard, what I've begun to notice is I've got new grasses coming in because they could breathe, they could get sunlight, they could get seeds in the ground because the reed canary got hit back so hard. And I'm really looking forward to things like grazing again in a year or 2 when this project is established, because the cattle are not going to hurt any of the vegetation when I bring them in. They would be in there in May. They're not going to hurt anything. So there's a lot of relationship that needs to go on whenever I think these projects happen. And I like to talk to ranchers about that, even though I still think I'm a rancher trainee. I want other folks that have land to understand that we can work together with the state or whoever, and that we can take care of the land and not just isolate it as an island and let it sit there and have the grasses choke everything out once we make this beautiful river channel.
You've been running cattle for 25 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Trainee status.
Well, I'm still a trainee. It's just I have a lot to learn. You guys know a hell of a lot more about it than I do.
No, I don't think that's the case at all. No, these river projects are pretty cool, and man, do they look like a disaster while they're going on.
Oh, goodness.
So if you're the type of person that thinks, no, like just let it be, and it, like, nature will heal itself, like, yeah, eventually for sure. But let's go ahead and step it up, because, the clock is ticking on Pacific salmon pretty hard right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking at a loss of those fish in the Snake River Basin in really short order if a bunch of things don't change. So we got to work on the things that we can. But if you are that type of person that doesn't think that we should go in there and try and work on it, you would hate to see it in progress.
Oh, it's frightening.
It is. It's bad. Those excavators and dozers and rippers, everything's going through, and you've got bare logs all over the place, and it looks like a battlefield.
It does.
Yeah.
It does, but then, like you said, it's amazing what between what plantings you put in and what Mother Nature does. It's remarkable.
It heals up really quick.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I had some clients down here with me a couple of years ago, and there from Portland, and this one guy says, "Oh, thank God you guys don't graze this. Like, what a disaster it would be if the cattle ever got into this." And I just kind of nodded, um, and I said, "Sir, look across the river there. Tell me what you see." And he's like, "Well, it's just beautiful. You know, it's really tall grass and the trees are doing really well." I said, "Look a little bit closer." And there are cattle there. The grass is just too tall to
Yeah,
be able to see them. So
absolutely.
then he starts seeing that there's cattle right there, and it's like it just interrupted everything that he thought he believed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was just team cows are bad, that
Mm-hmm.
you can't have cattle and conservation together. And with the way we've been doing it, you can't have them separately.
No,
Yeah, they have to work together.
absolutely not. That's premier thing I learned from Doug McDaniel was how animals and land go together when they're put together well and taken well care of. You know, it just right now, you know, yeah, I'm a rancher, but I don't own cattle. I lease my land to for folks to graze on. I want them there grazing because the cattle are going to help my grass grow because they help my soil get better and they improve my whole landscape. So I want cattle on my land so that because they're my tool.
Yeah.
You know, they're absolutely my tool and there's so many great tools that we can use with nature and just work it out. And you know, I can see what happens whenever I graze my land properly. You know, and it's a great symbiotic relationship, give and take. You know, the person who leases from me has fat cows. I have lots of fertilizer and all the stuff in the soil is happy because they're getting all that good stuff and the grass grows and it's beautiful.
You've still got family in Texas?
Oh yes.
Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you get to see them often?
Um, a couple of times a year. I have a son there and I have a sister and her kids there. And so my son has two kids and so yeah, I get to see them. Um, in fact, my son's coming relatively soon for a couple of weeks, which will be great.
What has kept you here? Like, why have you stayed in Eastern Oregon?
Wow. I'll start with a simple answer, in that I absolutely love it here. It it first is the aesthetics. I always knew that someday I had to live in the mountains. That was all my dad's fault because he talked to me as a little girl before we got to go on vacation with mom and dad. We had to be old enough, and he kept talking about the mountains. And when I saw my first mountain, it was this barren thing out in New Mexico, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. So, in all of my time in living and working in the city, I knew that when I decided to retire, that I was going to have to go live in the mountains out west. I lived in mountains in the east, not the same, beautiful, but not the same. So, aesthetically, I love it here, but it's much more than aesthetics. There is a spirit here that is absolutely remarkable. You know, where all of the challenges this county has faced, and I didn't know it before we lost logging, but I saw the aftermath. And I saw such resilience, such determination, and I really appreciate and value the differences in this county from ranchers and loggers and farmers and individual business people and the folks that have a business with tourism. But we all stick together, we all stand up for each other. You know, you go to a pie auction because someone's had the misfortune of an illness or a death in their family, and people that you know don't have lots of money come and spend, they buy a pie so that that other family can be have some benefit to help them get a leg up again. There's just
They'll
something
buy that pie for $1,000.
absolutely, you know,
Yeah.
it's just this place, you know, and I say this, I don't want people listening, but this place is so remarkable. You know, I wouldn't, I love Texas. I absolutely love Texas.
I love Texas
You know,
too.
but I can't, I don't want to live, this is home. Doug made it home. The culture and the people here have made it home for me. And I also, Doug is here.
Hmm.
You know, I'm on my place.
Yeah.
Something he created, something he loved. I love it. My kids love it. I wouldn't trade this place for the world. I think some people thought that maybe when Doug passed away that I would leave, and that's, I guess, a normal assumption. But I am tied and bound to here, and I hope that nothing ever changes so that I can stay here until it's time for me to go.
I didn't think that you would leave, but I was afraid because I would miss you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. This is also a bit of a revolving door. We see lots of people come here, they fall in love with the aesthetic, but then the reality of it smashes into their face and they go away. They leave. It's got to be just a tremendous place for these realtors that can just sell
Oh,
the same property
yeah.
every year. But what do you see as the difference between the folks that make it and the folks that don't?
Um, I think some folks come in the, let's say, the ag area and don't quite understand. They're new to ranching or farming or whatever, and they don't really understand all the dynamics of what it takes to make that work for them. Whether it's understanding they only control a third of what they deal with, and that's just what they decide to do. They don't control the weather or the market. But I think that's kind of a normal thing for folks that don't. Then I think others don't really recognize what winter is like, and they get cold and don't want to be cold, so they go to some place where it's warm. I get that, but I think then there are folks that have a lot of money, and that enables them to find favorite places, and they find a new favorite place, and so maybe being here doesn't satisfy them quite in the same way that it did once. And I think it's all the normal things. I don't know that there's anything real unusual about why folks don't make it here as opposed to any other place. Of course, I'm really biased and think if you can make it here, what a thing to make happen for yourself, because it's just such an amazing place.
Yeah. Yeah, it is nice, but you've got to live here on purpose.
I think so, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't think people live here incidentally.
No.
And there is a different reason for everyone. But yeah, the winters definitely do it. Uh, there's only one road in, so when the passes close
Mm-hmm.
and they shut down the interstates and the grocery store runs out of food, people get a little panicky.
Oh, yeah.
So
They panic the same in Texas when it snows. They go to the grocery store and buy everything. It's going to be snowing for 2 days.
yeah,
It's just the way it goes.
I remember when I lived on the Outer Banks, there was a hurricane that was supposed to come right over the top of the island that I lived on. And gosh, I'd only ever seen hurricanes on the news, so I went and bought plywood, and I'm nailing up my windows, and I go to the grocery store. Like, everything's really normal at the
Mm-hmm.
grocery store, except they're completely sold out of liquor and booze. Like, no beer,
Oh, my.
couldn't find any alcohol at all. And I was like, oh, that's kind of goofy. And I go back and I'm like, filling up sandbags and we're nailing up plywood. And my neighbors came out and they're like, you don't have to do that. I was like, oh, have you guys not heard that there's a hurricane coming? They're like, we're going to have a party. You're going to have a good time.
Oh,
You come
my.
over with us, but like, you don't have to do all that. I was like, okay. So the hurricane comes, not that big of a deal. It's just a Tuesday for them. But that winter, they got a forecast. They got a forecast that said that there was going to be less than 1/10 of an inch of snow.
Oh, my.
Yeah, 1/10 of an inch. I think that's one snowflake.
Mm-hmm.
And it was panic. They shut down the base. They shut down the schools.
Oh, yeah.
They shut down everything. You couldn't buy a calorie of food in the grocery stores. They were
No.
empty.
No.
Yeah. But the hurricane was nothing.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's the snow.
Yeah.
Terrifies them. And you sure as heck don't want to be on the roads when in Texas, except the Panhandle, but like Dallas. Don't get on the roads,
Mm.
even if you've lived in the north, because the other folks that are on the road don't have a clue how to drive. And they'll kill you before you'll kill yourself. It's just,
There was another time there that it actually did snow a bit. And I was out driving around. I thought snow on the beach was beautiful and it was fun. And in North Carolina, and may still be this way, was then, if you got a DUI, you lost your license. And you could still operate a vehicle if it was under 50 cc's. So they had a bunch of these mopeds that were 49 cc mopeds. And I was pulled over looking at the beach, and I saw this guy coming on a moped, and it was slick. And I thought, man, that's pretty gangster.
Ooh.
And as he got close, I saw that he had hockey skates on, and he had both of his skates on the ground and was on his little moped, and he was going to work. And
Oh my
I
gosh.
was like, this storm shut down the United States Marine Corps, but this dude from Michigan that got a DUI is still out there
Oh, I
going to wherever he
know.
needs to go. I loved it.
That's funny.
What are your feelings towards barbecue?
Oh, now you're setting me up on that one. Barbecue is wonderful. Texas makes the best.
For all cuts?
I can't say for all cuts because I
Chicken,
haven't had all
sausage,
cuts.
pork ribs,
Okay, well,
brisket?
I'll do ribs, brisket, pork, yeah, chicken. Yeah, I mean, it's just good.
You're going to give it to Texas in every category.
Yeah,
Okay.
I am
All right.
actually. Uh-huh.
All right. Good for you.
I'm very biased,
It's a
can't you
bold
tell?
choice. I think Texas does a terrific job with brisket. Yeah.
Oh, the ribs are good.
Not as good as Memphis.
No, no, I have
Mem-
had Memphis ribs.
Memphis dry rubs. Man, that's I think that's the way for ribs, but
There's a lot
yeah,
of good barbecue around.
there is. What a fun thing that we've developed cultures around barbecue
Hmm.
in these different regions of our country.
Yeah,
People are passionate about it.
they are, and they have all their barbecue cook-offs, and
Yeah.
I've always wanted to go to one, but I've never been, so
Mm.
maybe someday.
Well,
And then chili cook-offs. Now we have chili. There's only one chili. I'm sorry, but
is there?
yeah, sorry.
Okay. And what are the components of the only one chili?
Oh well, you have to have the right chilies, and you have to take time and let them steep and get the juice and get the right chilies, and you can put a little beer in it if you want. You have to put masa in it
Mm.
toward the end, and true Texans leave out the beans too, and you have to have
There's
good.
no beans in chili.
Not in Texas, I'll
So what is it?
slap
Just
me upside the face. I will put pinto beans in mine, but at home they don't put beans.
is it just like hamburger and like a
It's
brown
usually good
liquid?
beef,
Yeah.
and then you can put like you could do some hamburger too, but not just hamburger. You want to have some like a good chuck roast or something you
Mm.
could put into your chili and cook it nice and slow, and then all your other secret spices. There's a little bit of might be a little bit of cocoa in there somewhere,
Yeah.
and just slight little nuances of things.
Uh, there's the guy that has one of the chuck wagon cooking outfits here, Rod. I can't
Hmm.
remember his last name. Uh, he won the beans category at I think a national level barbecue
Oh,
deal. It was in Texas, but he was so drunk he couldn't remember how he
what he
did it.
did? Oh no!
So it was a one-time thing.
Oh
Yeah,
well, he makes good barbecue. I do
he
have to
does.
say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He has the chuck wagon from Lonesome Dove that he hauls around, and that's what he cooks out of. He's a good cook.
Yep,
It's killing me that I can't remember his name right now.
I
He's a
know.
nice guy. Uh, what advice do you have to a woman who loses their husband? Like that's a hard thing. It's
Hmm.
a hard thing.
I would say first early keep yourself busy, and if you have family, keep your family as close as they want to be, and know that in time you'll have to wean yourself, but think about just living your life and going and doing it. You won't not think of him. You'll be sad, and it'll creep up on you when you least expect it. Um, but I think for me, and I would pass it along to anyone who's interested, one of the things I've learned in this whole experience is that it's a journey, and that I am finding and discovering how to have my relationship with Doug in a different way. And that helps me because it's a transition. It's not closure. I don't see my life with Doug not being in it as a closure to my life with him. I don't even want to use that word because it's not closure. It's a transformation. Because if I think you love your husband, it's maybe a different experience than if you don't. I'm not sure because I loved mine. But it's not about trying to avoid or get rid of a memory. It's just about how do I embrace it differently. And it's a bit challenging because where I live, he's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
In this county, he's everywhere. He made such an impact, and he had so many different ways of being with this county. But we have all these wonderful children that he brought 5 into it, and I had 1, and so it's just that discovery of moving forward with him in my life in a different way, and realizing that you can do that. That in all of the hurt and the agony and the missing, that you can move forward. I still miss him. I still go through moments of just being angry that he's not here, not at him, not at anything, just the fact that he's not here, or just the sitting around on these lovely spring days and talking about what a lovely day it is. And that's where I say, okay, I get it. And then I'll see, just the other day, I posted 2 pictures of rainbows. And a friend of mine, this is on Facebook, and a friend of mine came and said, well, Doug is saying hello. And I said, that was exactly my thought. Are the little blue butterflies that we have in the mountains. He would get down on his hands and knees to see those blue butterflies. And so when I see a blue butterfly, I know that he's here. So that's my way of being. But the fact that we can move forward and keep those memories and just know that it's a transition, that it's a new way to have a relationship with someone. It isn't always fun, but it is what it is, and I intend to keep evolving and discovering my relationship with him.
I think about him whenever I do something correctly. If it's in any of the categories that that I learned or shared with him. So if I run a rapid and my boat just right, or if I cut a tree down and the stump looks just right,
Mm-hmm.
Anything that is like within that category that is something that I either did with Doug or talked with him about, or knew that he was passionate about. Like, if I get it just right and I'm satisfied with it, that's when I think, man, I wish he was here to see this.
It's exactly what I think on the ranch. I'm
Yeah.
like, did I graze this good? Are you looking down? Are you okay? Are you okay with what I did on the river project? Should I do this over here, or should I do that over there? And yeah.
It's a powerful thing to have a figure like that in your life, that understands our potential and wants to hold us all to the standard of what we can be.
Absolutely.
And whether they're with us in memory or in body, doesn't really change.
No.
In some of those ways. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your stories, for your continued work on actual conservation. And I think that we should probably do some fishing at some point this summer.
I think so. I appreciate this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.